Welcome to the first session in our International Roundtable series commemorating that 400 years ago the Dutch East India Company brutally murdered the Bandanese leaders in their pursuit for a monopoly on the spices nutmeg and mace. The aim of this series is to foster a global conversation about the history and heritage of the Banda Islands with speakers from Indonesia, the Netherlands, and experts from other parts of the world. Please visit our website for more information about the organization and this series. Alongside this series, we aim to support the commemoration activities on the Banda Islands. They will be organizing a festival that is aimed to empower the local community. Please consider to donate to this cause through this link. Due to a technical issue, the first few minutes were not recorded. The recording of this first session starts with an introduction by Pepijn Brandon, who is the moderator of this roundtable.
Where the Banda massacre was presented as exceptional in Dutch history, as maybe even as an incident, as an aberration from the general course of the East India Company, which was focused in this view more on trade than on violence and conquest, where debates have focused excessively on the personality of Jan Pieterszoon Koen and his motivations, to the exclusion not only of the motivation of the company, but certainly of the motivations of his victims. This myopic view of the Dutch actions, of course, had a very strong national bias in its own right. It's not the case that the English competitors of the Dutch thought that this was an exceptional behavior of the Dutch. Rather, they, in their propaganda, would present it as absolutely typical of how the Dutch tended to protect their commercial interests. And I'm absolutely sure, although I must admit I'm not an expert on this, that in Indonesian historiography, the Banda massacre is viewed as an important part of a long history and of colonial of continuity in colonial violence, rather than as this moment of aberration. So we realized from the outset that we have to open up and not see this as a Dutch conversation, but see it as a global conversation. Secondly, that it has to be a global conversation that breaks with the most important obfuscation of this narrative, which is the making invisible of the motives of the Bandanese themselves, where given, especially by giving a priority to historical methods and written sources, which by definition almost always were the sources written by the Dutch, this meant a complete invisibility of the Dutch counterparts, which in part is symbolized by this notion of a slaughter of the Orang Kaya, where the Orang Kaya in Dutch historiography never have a name. They don't have a name. They don't have traditions. They didn't have motives other than the motives that were that we could see in the mirror of the Dutch. In order to allow for a wider perspective and a perspective that includes the Bandanese, it's not only crucial that we have the participation of the Hatta Sjahrir College and our colleagues on Banda. It's also crucial that we see this as an interdisciplinary affair, that we bring into conversation historical records, with the archaeological records, with the work that has been done by historical anthropologists, with heritage study, because we realize that so much of the knowledge on the Banda events is not just stored in sort of the written sources that are in the archives here in the Netherlands, but is stored in memory, in songs, and in dance, and in the histories that are passed on from generation to generation. So we hope that this conversation opens us up for these perspectives as as well, and allow for a radical re-examination of the historical events that give pride of place not to those who the Dutch once robbed of their lives, their labor, their lands, their goods, and their heritage, but who persisted nonetheless. So with those general remarks, I'll finish my opening, and I want to go to our speakers who've each been asked to do not a full lecture, but a short 10 to 15 minutes presentation of the main lines of their current work that can then open up the floor for our for questions and debate. And the first speaker that I would like to turn to is Dr. Mohammed Farid. Dr. Mohammed Farid obtained a doctoral degree in sociology at the Universiteit Airlangga Surabaya in 2016. He is the dean of Hatta Sjahrir College on Banda Neira, where he teaches as well. He recently published the book Tanah Banda, Esai-esai tentang mitos sejarah sosial budaya Pulau Banda Neira, which in my probably very bad and rough translation is the land of Banda, essays on myth, history, and social culture of the island Banda, Banda Neira. And I'm delighted to give the floor to Mohammed Farid first.
Okay, thank you, my friend Pepijn. And your translation Indonesian bahasa is very good. Okay, thank you for giving me the time as the first speaker. Firstly, I'd like to point out to our really guests, since we have very big difference time, yeah, because it's already 10 p.m. more Banda time, which is quite late for our. But I'm still happy because tonight I am accompanied by my Banda leaders to discuss directly with you all expert from abroad about my hometown, especially regarding to the massacre or genocide in Banda 1621. And secondly, I would like to also thank you for my friends, Mr. Rizal Bahalwan, Mr. Rizal Bahalwan, known as Mr. Abba, who has allowed me to use his very beautiful hotel, Cilubintang Estate, where I am currently sitting here. Yeah. As you know, this hotel is right in the middle between Fort Nassau. Fort Nassau is right behind me, and then the whale we are discussing tonight. So you can imagine now how I feel tonight. Yeah. To start discussion tonight, allow me and my elders to pray to the spirit of the Banda ancestors, the heroes. May Allah give the best place in heaven. Saya minta untuk kita sama-sama membaca doa kepada leluhur kita sebelum kita berdiskusi. Al-Fatihah hadratil auliya salihin. Para orang-orang tua kita mudah-mudahan selalu diberkahi dan diberikan tempat yang terbaik. Al-Fatihah. Amin. First, to start the discussion, I would like to clarify some terms between massacre and genocide, and maybe ethnic cleansing, which actually have distinct differences and therefore cannot be used carelessly. Massacre is defined as the process of organized civilian destruction. According to Semmelin, 2002, the massacre aims to destroy humans and goods. Semmelin then divided into 3 variants of the massacre. The first, slaughter to conquer. Second, slaughter to eradicate. And the third, slaughter to rebellion. And then ethnic cleansing, as Turner, 1999, is defined as cleaning up an area and not leaving anyone alive. Turner refers to the Serbian-Croatian context as well as the Nazi in Germany. Also, Neira, 2001, makes a specific definition of the term ethnic cleansing, namely to get rid of an ethnicity. Ethnic cleansing, in Neymar's perspective, is the same as deporting residents. And the last, genocide, when we referring to the United Nations Genocide Convention, genocide is one of the acts intended to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Frigol, 2008, proposes a more specific definition that genocide is the result of a plan by a state authority and is directly or indirectly carried out by the state's apparatus in its own territory or in a conquered territory, with the aim of destroying a population or group of humans. Semmelin, 2002, even identifies the purpose of massacre in the context of genocide is to restructure society, which he called social engineering techniques. Bowman, 2002, also says the same thing, that modern genocide is one of the elements of social engineering to produce a social order in accordance with the ideal society project. So in my opinion, genocide has a broader and more extreme spectrum than the other 2 terms, ethnic cleansing and massacre. Semmelin even included the term genocide to refer to an extreme subtype of the massacre. Massacre category to be eradicated. To be eradicated. So genocide is a particular massacre whose aims is the total eradication of a community. Therefore, I prefer to use the term genocide for the context of Banda 1621. With the reasons, first, the genocide was carried out by the VOC, which in the case acted on behalf of a country. Second, killing the people of Banda, who in fact are multicultural. It's not one ethnic. And the last and the third, killing is not for the purpose or simply conquering, but total annihilation for the purpose of producing a new social order or society that is claimed to be an ideal society. As we know, the massive deportation by the VOC of Banda people to leave Banda and people of other ethnicity to the island of Banda is concrete evidence for this. Okay, so the second I want to say that impact of genocide in 1621 leaves a deep mark on the memories of the Banda people today that are hard to forget. That is the reason why in Banda, to this day, there are villages named Kampung Pun, and then Kampung Parhopen, which of course refers to the names of these VOC figures, Verhoeven and Jan Petersen Koen. So I named this is a memoria in passionis, or the experience of the suffering of the Banda people over the brutality during the VOC era. And it leaves scars and trauma. However, and this is important, the people of Banda are not trapped in long suffering. Strongly to this day. That is, the historical implication of genocide remain in the minds of Banda people as unforgettable, but they have forgiven to this incident sufficiently by trying to live together, even with Westerners, in a peaceful way to this day. The last thing I want to say, the third, the sociological implication of the massacre of the Banda people, which aim to transform the Banda population into a completely new and idealized population from a colonial perspective, is a historical error. In fact, the Banda people today are very solid, consisting of various ethnicities who are very plural. And that is the ideal type for the Indonesian nation, which often occurs ethnic and religious conflict. Banda historical facts are very likely to be proposed to challenge Ben Anderson's concept of imagined community, that the nation is not something real, but something that is imagined. That nationalism or patriotism was formed by the media or modern printing capitalism. However, the Banda fact can invalidate this argument. So I dare to say, if Indonesia may still be in the process of becoming a nation, Banda has actually finished with it. Banda is a typical idol for a plural society living together as a nation, namely Orang Banda. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohammed, for these profound remarks. I'm really sorry that we're doing this through Zoom and not in a room where you could hear us all giving you a warm round of applause, but you'll have to imagine that we're the next speaker is Martine van Martine van Ittersum is a senior lecturer at the University of Dundee in the United Kingdom. She received a PhD in history from Harvard University in 2002. She specializes in Dutch overseas expansion in the early modern period with a focus on the social history of knowledge. And in 2017 or 2016, among many of her other works that could be mentioned, but she published this really important article in breaking through what I would suggest was this sort of myopic view of the events in the History of European Ideas, an article called Debating Natural Law in the Banda Islands, a case study of Anglo-Dutch imperial competition in the East Indies, 1609-1621, which really added, I think, very important relief to how we, relief, how do you say that? To how we view the Banda event. So without further ado, Martine.
Thank you, Pepijn. And thank you, Mohammed Farid, for these introductory remarks. Unfortunately, I've not been able to visit the Banda Islands so far, but I look forward to doing so in the future. I will share my screen in order to let me present my PowerPoint to you. Yeah, you should see it now. And hopefully it will work like this. Yeah. I'm going to go through this quite quickly. So this is based on quite a bit of research that I did for my PhD at Harvard. I know Sven Beckert is in the room. So hello, Sven. Please give my regards to my friends at Harvard. And I should also want to underline that, yes, I did my research in the Dutch National Archives and in the National Archives in Kew in London. But this is very much, I would say, you know, a result, I would say, of my time at Harvard, where I was able to literally get away from the Dutch setting, you could say, and think of some new ideas, new perspectives in terms of looking at Dutch colonial history. And I remember when the civil wars were going on in Yugoslavia, I was sitting in Leiden Library, nice, peace and quiet, but I was reading the documents, you know, from Jan Pieterszoon Koen and others, literally on the massacre in the Banda Islands. And I was thinking by myself, what was the difference, or what is the difference between what happened in the Banda Islands in 1621 and the ethnic cleansing that at that point was going on in Yugoslavia, right? And these were literally my ideas in Leiden Library in Harvard while I was doing my research. Well, let's get started here. Okay, here's my big friend, Hugo Grotius, still today regarded as a founding father of international law, the Peace Palace in The Hague, the seat of the International Court of Justice and of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, still has the biggest collection, literally, of Grotius's printed works in the world, literally. And so, you know, he is still regarded there as a founding father of international law. And one of the most important texts that he published, Mare Liberum, is still regarded as a key text in international law today. What is less well known, perhaps, is that he published Mare Liberum at the request of the Dutch East India Company. And what did he argue? He argued that, you know, basically freedom of navigation, trade and fishing was supposedly, you know, a right that belonged to people all over the world, but particularly, of course, to the Dutch and to the Dutch East India Company, and that they should be able to continue to trade and navigate in Asian waters. Let's see, during the 12 years truce, there were negotiations going on at that point between the Dutch Republic and Spain about a seizure, let's see, a short pause in the conflict going on in Europe at that point. Now, what was behind Mare Liberum and other works published by Grotius was quite clearly, you know, a justification of aggressive Dutch expansion into Southeast Asia. He was literally hand in glove with the Dutch East India Company. And so in two colonial conferences, that's the name, by the way, that we give to these events, let's see, from our modern day perspective. So two conferences, let's see, in London and in The Hague, between the Dutch East India Company and the English East India Company. Grotius was literally negotiating on behalf of the VOC. And he then explained to the English East India Company that, guess what, Mare Liberum didn't apply to them because supposedly there were exclusive treaties between the VOC and Asian rulers and peoples, which basically suggested that Asian rulers and peoples had agreed to sell all their produce to the Dutch East India Company for a fixed price and, of course, in perpetuity. Well, let's say that's a treaty without get-out clauses, let me put it this way. In a modern way, I think the way you can call this is a protection tribute exchange. Yeah, so these treaties, and they are still there in the Dutch National Archives. We have these written documents. They indicate that the VOC is supposed to protect Asian rulers and peoples from their enemies, and in return for that, these rulers and peoples will then basically hand over produce valued, of course, by the VOC, again, for a set price, and in various cases, in perpetuity. That's literally what it says in these treaties. Then, of course, an important rule of international law still today, pacta sunt servanda. Treaties must be performed. I mean, you can literally see how much of international law today literally is grounded in this colonial experience. And yeah, we need to ask some pretty big questions about that. At these conferences, the English negotiators threw back at Grotius that there was a civil war going on in the Banda Islands, and he simply brushed that away. Nope, there was no such thing as a civil war going on in the Banda Islands. Supposedly, you know, most of the Bandanese were on the side of the Dutch, and yes, there were a few rebels, you know, but obviously the UC was going to deal with that, right? So complete denial in that sense on Grotius's part. Just a little map of the Banda Islands, and of course the famous painting of Banda Neira, which is in the Rijksmuseum, by the way, in Amsterdam. It was a painting produced for the VOC directors in Amsterdam. Yeah, the painter, of course, never revisited Neira, and so I hope that the people watching in Neira see something that is recognizable to them. I'm not sure. What is very prominent, of course, are the VOC buildings, Fort Nassau and Fort Belgica. Yeah, that is literally what is immediately catches the eye when you look at this painting. So this is not a neutral painting, not at all, right? It is there to please the Amsterdam VOC directors. Okay, so the Bandanese massacre, you know, is there a larger perspective? Well, there certainly is in terms of, you know, European competition for empire. Yeah. I would also want to stress that the VOC and the English East India Company, the way they approached this was quite similar, certainly in terms of their justifications and their claims. Yeah. So the VOC claimed to have conquered Neira, Pulawe, and Lontor in just wars. Yeah. And how do you arrive at a just war? Well, basically it was punishment of local populations for their failure to abide by treaties. So as soon as the Bandanese or any other inhabitants of the Spice Islands started trading with the English, then the VOC, supported by Mr. Grotius, believed it had the right to intervene and to punish the local population for literally not sticking with the treaty. Yeah, again, protection, tribute, exchange. Yeah. And the Dutch fortifications, so prominent on this painting of Banda Neira, were there as markers of sovereignty. So yes, of course, they were also, you know, means to literally, you know, how do you call this? Sorry, that's my thread here. To basically force the local population to behave in a certain way, and of course to respect, you know, the VOC presence. But they are also used in negotiations at various levels, including in Europe itself, to literally, you know, make good the claim to certain areas. Yeah. Now, the English East India Company behaved in a similar way. The inhabitants of Pulawan decided that their best way to resist the VOC was to literally ally themselves with the English, and they do that in 1616. And if you look at the treaty between the Bandanese and the English East India Company at that point, it's the same story. It is a protection tribute exchange. What do the English want, in return for providing protection to the inhabitants of Pulawan? They want spices, and that's the only reason the English East India Company is there. It's very simple. Yeah, and again, the English will also build up some fortifications, markers of sovereignty. However, the English are not successful in, literally protecting the inhabitants of Pulawan against the VOC, and the VOC took possession of the island in 1621. There was also a treaty of defense between the English and Dutch East India Companies. In theory, it lasted 20 years. In practice, it broke down much earlier. It was meant to give the English East India Company access to the spice trade, but in fact, it strengthened the Dutch position in the Spice Islands. Yeah. when Jan Pieterszoon Koen launches the expedition against Lantor, he first asks the English whether they want to join in or not. And the English at that point are like, no, we don't have money basically to contribute to the fleet. And so they step back. And that, of course, is an ideal opportunity for Jan Pieterszoon Koen to literally go in there with a lot of force and to do his own thing. He literally doesn't have to consult with the English ally, because the English ally has already said, well, sorry, we're not interested. Yeah. So it gives him pretty much a free hand, you could say, in the Banda Islands during this expedition in 1621. And of course, here's the man everybody loves to hate, Jan Pieterszoon Koen. So the commander of the expedition in 1621. Dutch historiography has generally vilified this guy and suggested that there were other VOC commanders who were much more lenient, much more understanding of the local population, etc. And for example, Laurens Royal was still, for example, considered a good guy, yeah, by somebody like Petronella Melix Roelofs, one of the great experts on the VOC, and the lady who wrote Asian Trade, European Influence at the beginning of the 1960s, a very influential book. And she, for her, Laurens Royal was her favorite, basically, as compared to Jan Pieterszoon Koen. But what I see in my research is, if you look at the run-up to the events of 1621, Laurens Royal basically adopted very similar tactics to the ones that Jan Pieterszoon Koen would use in 1621. I don't think that there is much in the way of difference. It's very clear that Royal didn't like Koen very much and vice versa, so there was personal animosity, absolutely. But in terms of the tactics, the strategies used in the Banda Islands and elsewhere, I don't think Royal was very different from Jan Pieterszoon Koen. So there is certainly consistency there in terms of the highest VOC leadership. The crucial role of Macassar is something that I emphasize in a more recent article. Lizzie's tracing the story up to 1662, a very powerful indigenous state. And it basically made it possible for English to remain, involved, you could say, in the Banda Islands for a couple of more decades, because from Macassar, you can set up a smuggling trade with the Banda Islands. And that's what the English did for quite a long time. The problem is that Macassar also came under increasing VOC pressure in the 1660s. Yeah. And that basically spells, I would say, the end of English involvement in the Spice Islands. Oh, sorry, I'm just going too fast here, I think. Can I go back here? Sorry, yep. Here's Governor General Johan Massacre, and he's the Governor General in the 1650s and 1660s. By the way, these paintings are paintings that were produced for, of course, the VOC, and these were the paintings hanging, in fact, in the mansion of the Dutch Governor General in Buitenzorg, Bandung, right up to 1948. Yeah. This is literally the series of portraits of Governor Generals of the Dutch East Indies, of course, hanging there in order to impress visitors with the long-lasting legacy of Dutch imperial rule in this part of the world. All of these paintings are now in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Okay, sorry, this is Macassar. I'm going now in the wrong direction. Apologies for that. Yeah. Okay, situation in the second half of the 17th century. Pularan was handed back to the English in late March 1665 as a result of a treaty of friendship between the Dutch and the English 3 years earlier. Yeah. Now, the friendship didn't last very long. The Second Anglo-Dutch War broke out literally that same year. And as soon as Jan Massacre in Batavia heard about the outbreak of war in Europe, he immediately ordered the capture of Pularan. Yeah. And in the Treaty of Breda in July 1667, basically, there's one principle that gets adopted by both sides, both parties keep whatever they possessed on a certain date, which is May 10th, Julian style 20th in the Georgian calendar, 1667. Yeah, that meant that at that point, the Hudson Valley, New York, was in English hands, and it remained English. Suriname, the Banda Islands, they were in Dutch hands, and they remained Dutch as a result of this peace treaty. Yeah. Now that's the situation in Europe. What I think is far more important in terms of geostrategic considerations in Southeast Asia itself is the Treaty of Mongaya. Yeah. Basically, Makassar, put under a lot of pressure by the VOC, was reduced through that treaty to basically the status of a vassal of the VOC. And the English were literally told to leave from Makassar, and other Europeans as well, by the way. And as a result, there was no more English smuggling trade with the Spice Islands. And here's the man responsible. He launched a big expedition against Makassar, Cornelis Janszoon Speelman, later on a governor general at that point, a commander of the expedition, the VOC expedition against Makassar.
Just a small remark, you're at 15 minutes now.
Yeah, can I just finish with this one, these conclusions? Yeah.
Sure.
So the importance of European sea power and local alliances is very clear in all of this. It literally fuels, of course, Dutch expansion in the Spice Islands. The English claimed to pull a run. I mean, it literally didn't mean anything unless you had, access to Makassar, for example. That was absolutely crucial in terms of, the English being able to get to pull a run, bring, materials there for building fortifications, but also to literally extract spices and to get that to first Makassar and then Bantam, and then of course for onward transportation to England. And the fall of Makassar in 1667 is literally what I would say is the concluding episode of, you could say, Dutch expansion in the Spice Islands. Imperial entities like the Dutch and the English are also empires of paper, and that's certainly a connection with the modern world. Think about the fact that in the modern world, international relations are all about treaties, all right? So treaty making is the name of the game here. Already in the 17th century, treaty making in Europe is very clearly influenced by imperial rivalry overseas. And in terms of treaties with indigenous peoples, they are no alternative to wars, not at all. They are, in fact, a crucial instrument of aggressive imperial expansion. Yeah, it's very clear that when you look at these treaties, that every new treaty basically reduces the room for maneuver on the part of indigenous peoples, and of course gives the VOC far more leeway in terms of also launching a just war. Yeah. Because it's the perceived failure of indigenous peoples to abide by treaties that results in punishment. And when you punish indigenous peoples, basically whatever you conquer there, you can keep, for yourself. And of course, these are all European ideas about international relations, about international law. The problem is a lot of that is still present in modern day international law. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martine, with this wide overview and important sort of conclusions that also bring us up to international law today. The final speaker is Tristan Mostert. Tristan is a PhD candidate at Leiden University. His research investigates the conflict between Southeast Asian state of Makassar and the Dutch East India Company in the mid-17th century. And together with Adam Klulo, who, by the way, also wrote a very important book, which was recently published on the Amboina massacre, which includes a large section on the Banda massacre as well. So together with Adam Klulo, he published a volume called The Dutch and English East India Companies, Diplomacy, Trade and Violence in Early Modern Asia. So I give the floor to Tristan.
Thank you. I will see if I can get my presentation working first. And my PowerPoint is currently crashing. I will close it and just give me 1 minute with this, because the images are kind of important. I'll just start talking in the meantime. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thanks to the first two speakers as well. I hope my PowerPoint comes back alive, by the way. What I hope to share with you in the 10 or 15 minutes that I have is something about the public perception of what happened in 1621, particularly in the West. What I actually hope to connect to how, hey, there's my presentation, but I think you started it, Joella. Is that right? Okay, well, this works, and I'll just ask you for the next slide whenever we need it. You can actually go to the next slide right now, if you like. Thank you. So in the Netherlands, in 1621 has become quite a visible event. People know about it, and what people tend to do is conflate what the Dutch were doing in the early 17th century in the Eastern Archipelago as a whole into this one event, into 1621. And what I hope to show in these 10 or 15 minutes is that not only in thought, but also in action, 1621 is not the big monolithic event that we tend to make out of it. 1621, although terrible, might be less bad than we imagine it to be, but the whole context in which it took place was far broader and also far more horrifying than we imagine, both before 1621 and after it. I will do so largely from, I guess, what is a rather more Dutch-centric perspective than I would like, but I think it is fair to investigate what the hell the Dutch were thinking they were doing, and that's what I hope to talk about. So let's start in 1598, the first visit of the Dutch to the islands, when they were still, you know, they sort of got in line with the other trading communities there. They opened their lodge, they paid their harbor tax and all that. They started trading there. In the years after that, from 1602 onwards, and particularly from around 1605, what we see is what Martine van Ittersum already alluded to, the sort of protection tribute schemes that the Dutch start setting up all throughout the Eastern Archipelago. So their oldest ally in the region, Hitu, basically invites them in a battle against the Portuguese with whom they are at war. Something very similar happens in Ternate, where they join with the Sultan there against the Spaniards, who has driven them from their island. And whereas they started being, well, not particularly interested in territorial possessions, they were expensive, you needed soldiers, they very soon changed their mind about this and think, hey, this is nice, we now own this place, we can make treaties in which they sell all their cloves and nutmeg to us. This is great. And they sort of apply the same model, you could say, to the Banda Islands. But it works far less well there than in some of it. It doesn't work particularly well anywhere, but the Banda Islands are particularly difficult in this respect. Various federations, village heads, they never know who they're having negotiations with. It frustrates them from very early on that it doesn't have the effect they want. So what we see very soon, and I might want to also connect to what Dr. Farid said, was that they start fantasizing about how they can sort of change the reality on the ground in the islands to fit their own needs. Genocide, as Dr. Farid said, is a very cynical and extreme form of social engineering, and they very soon take on this sort of social engineering mindset. The quote you currently see on screen is from Cornelis Matelief when he is still in Asia, and he makes a rather, in retrospect, a rather silly suggestion, but it sort of shows you how they were how they were thinking. So at the time, the Dutch were still somewhat good friends with the Sultan of Goa. They found all these orang kaya difficult and difficult to understand. So they sort of imagined, what about if we could get the Sultan of Goa, of Makassar, to conquer the Banda Islands and then replace the entire elite, the orang kaya, with some people of his own, and then settle everyone into one town, which where we will also be. So we have very good oversight. We can really control this trade much better, and we'll have the Sultan to deal with, not all these various orang kaya and villages and federations and Ulisiwa and Ulilima and whatnot. Of course, this is an entirely unrealistic plan, but it really shows the sort of mindset the Dutch were getting into very early on in this process. Very soon afterwards, perhaps the next slide, Joanna. We see that people like Jacques L'Hermite simply opt for, this is a very unspecific quote, but opt for, okay, it's not working with these treaties, we should use force. Then the first time force is really used is, of course, well known, and I think we can go over it pretty quickly. That is in 1609. When the Dutch arrive there, try to reinforce their claims, have this long letter from the stadtholder, and also start building a fort. First, they try to seek permission, they don't get it, they lose their patience, start building it, and this leads to the ambush, which I won't go into in detail here, of Verhoeven, and the subsequent expeditions of the Dutch around the island and their claim of having conquered Neira afterwards. Of course, they only control Neira at that point, and not the other islands, and their frustrations remain because the trade, of course, starts just goes on from the other islands. And then we see their thinking about this evolve into even more extreme suggestions. So they've conquered Neira, they say, okay, this is our island now. But what about the other, about the nutmeg trade still going on? Could I have the next slide, please, Joella? So Hendrik Brouwer, for example, after a brief visit to the islands in 1612, suggests, what we should do? All these nutmeg trees in areas we can't control, we should cut them down. Jacques L'Hermite, back in the Netherlands, writing his Remonstrantie, makes a very similar suggestion for the entire Eastern Archipelago. So he suggests, wherever we can't control the clove and nutmeg trees, we should just destroy them. That's the only way we're ever going to get hold of this trade. More disturbingly, and that's the next slide, Jacques L'Hermite makes a very similar suggestion in the same remonstrance about the people of Banda in particular. They have the most trouble there. They consider them, well, I won't use all the expletives they use in the documents, but in L'Hermite's opinion, they should conquer the islands with force and either bring them to heel entirely or eradicate the population and repopulate the island. So this was on the table as an idea in a document presented to the directors in the Netherlands in 1612. And it might be interesting to point out that this is like Koen 2 years later also writes a discourse in which he presents his plans to the directors, and L'Hermite was far more extreme in his ideas than Koen, who of course in the end will actually get to execute all these nasty schemes. What we see in the period afterwards is that the directors sort of internalize all these suggestions that are made to them, and in 1615 it is for the first time they who suggest to the Governor General and Council in the Indies that this might be a good idea. So in 1615 they suggest perhaps you should extirpate some of the population, destroy I write clove trees here, that's wrong, it should be nutmeg trees, sorry, in this region. Of course, in the meantime, and this is also an essential point, we see that Pulau Ai is conquered, and what we see there is that Ai is in practice depopulated. There are very visual descriptions of how the Dutch conquer it, and the population flees before the Dutch, escapes from the island. Some fall to their deaths from the last remaining stronghold. And the Dutch then start repopulating that island, not in 1621, but before. They have a sultan from Siau and his people settled there, some Maardijkers, some Spaniards. So this sort of depopulation and resettlement scheme starts in practice actually well before 1621. The same happens in Neira, where the original population sort of melts away after the conquest. A lot of people apparently leave, and they also start letting in other people to cultivate the nutmeg and all that. And that brings us to 1621. And I think I'm sort of running out of time, so we'll be brief about that.
You have a couple of minutes.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, what the main thing I want to point out is that so all these ideas that Koen executes in this year are on the table. But it is worth pointing out that it does not seem to have been his intention as he arrived there. So he had a plan to simply subjugate the islands, conquer them. Well, a lot happens there, which we can't go into detail. There is this colonial anxiety. The Netherlands are, the Dutch there are really scared of what they're doing in a way, and of the situation they have brought themselves into. There are all sorts of things that go wrong, and it ends up with the decision to deport the entire population, and whoever they can't get to in these mountain forts that are still holding out, just let them starve. Just let them starve up there. And of course, with the decision depicted here, this is one of the complicated things about 1621. There are no visual sources of it. There are very little visual sources of this period more generally. So a Bandanese artist, I believe, has made this painting in the 80s, if I'm correct. Actually following a Dutch source very closely. So we see the Japanese mercenaries literally cutting up some of the orang kaya and beheading the rest. So the Dutch were literally decapitating Bandanese society here, killing the leaders. The responses are interesting to look at. So on the one hand, and that's the next slide, if you please, Joella. So on the one hand, there is shock, or at least feigned shock. So a sort of famous quote is by the directors who write to Koen that they hope that it might have been done slightly more, slightly less violent. In this case, it's important to point out that that wasn't really a moral point. They were worrying about the consequences that this would have throughout the Eastern Archipelago more generally. The second quote is by Artis Gijsels and is, let's say, it's actually a very interesting quote. So Gijsels was one of the people on the side of Real and people like that. What he points out here is that these people, the orang kaya, were fighting for the freedom of their country, as we did against the Spaniards. And then he says, apparently some people have wanted to establish an eternal name for themselves here. And in time, a book like the one about the Spaniards in the West Indies will probably be written about it. So here he explicitly refers to the Spanish Black Legend and all the books that were written about how cruel the Spanish were in the Americas, and is sort of holding up a mirror to the Dutch, that they were now basically doing the same thing. And I think I'm really out of time now, but I will end with the brief remark that this was not an endpoint, 1621, and that in a lot of ways it seems to have inspired later policy as well. So less well known, but at least as big and far more stretched out were the wars over cloves, where the Dutch also were fantasizing about depopulating and repopulating entire areas, also often ended up letting people starve in their mountain forts. Oh, you're going to go up there where you can't follow, where we can't follow you. Okay, stay there and starve. And that they resorted increasingly to, I guess, what you could call ecocide. So first cutting the clove trees, then escalating that strategy to a point where they were simply turning, as they called it, entire islands into an eternal wasteland, and then the forced depopulation and resettlement of the entire population of, and that's the last slide, of the entire peninsula of Wamwal, Western Seram, which you see in this image, which was declared to be a wasteland for eternity by the Dutch, and the entire population was moved off to areas where they could control them. So you see that this sort of social engineering thinking appears very early in the Dutch relations to Banda, that they also start doing it well before 1621, and that it is also something they keep on doing afterwards for decades elsewhere in the eastern archipelago. Thank you.
Thank you, Tristan, and I think a perspective that really also supports many of the things that were said by Mohammed Farid in the first contribution on the premeditated way that genocide took place. Right. So thanks to the three speakers, and as announced, we have a lot of comments already in the chat, but we'll still first go to Cilu Bintang to ask Mohammed and the people in Cilu Bintang whether they want to raise a first question, whether there's anyone who has a comment. Mohammed, you're still on mute.
Iya, oke. Ada yang mau tanya di sini? Tadi Abang sudah bantu untuk menerjemahkan. Mungkin ada yang mau tanya di sini.
Ada yang mau tanya kan? Everybody want to ask something? Yes. Hello, everybody. So we are Bandanese now. We are at the Cilu Bintang estate. The location is very strategy. In the right side or the west side, you can see the port of Nassau. And then this is the story right now where everybody talk about the genocide, and then we are at the right place. And then tonight, me and Farid, we are work together, and we invite some of the Bandanese people as representative want to see the run the table round for the ceremonial, ya. Iya. Kalau ada yang pertanyaan, ada yang mau tanya? Iya.
Oh iya.
Coba tanya ke sana, bilang audiens ada tanya, kenapa terjadi di Pattaya ini di Neira? Memangnya ada apa?
Oh,
so this is a very good question. So one of our other men, Mr. Johar, say, why the young Peterson Koen did the massacre of the Bandanese at the time? Maybe you can tell the story. Why did he did like that for our the nobleman? Thank you very much.
So that's a question about the motives, right?
Yeah.
About the motive.
Tristan, did I see your hand? Or?
Well, I could try to give an answer at the very least. So what you see happening in the course, so what happens in 1621, it should also be noted, takes a long time. He arrives there in late February. The execution of the Orang Kaya is in March. And what you see is that the Dutch keep on sort of changing their plans in the meantime as the situation evolves. In March, they believe they have conquered the island and that everyone has surrendered, and that turns out not to be the case. And you see them getting more frustrated and getting more paranoid as things evolve. It starts with the fact that a lot of the population has retreated into the mountains and is refusing to surrender. It continues with them trying to get the people of Selama to help them get the rest of the people off the island. And of course, they don't want to, and they don't cooperate. Then they decide, okay, we'll get everybody out. and if they're not participating, we'll force them, or they can stay up there and starve. And in all this, they at a certain moment decide, well, this is all a sort of conspiracy by the Orang Kaya. They have surrendered, but now they are still fighting us. So they are, shall we say, they are now committing treason. You know, they were already our what do you call that? We were already controlling them, but now they are still fighting us. There was this rumor about this sort of setup where they were going to kill Koen, and this was used as a, well, I guess you could say, excuse or cause to actually interrogate them all very brutally, and then execute them. So it was something that was, as far as we can tell, not premeditated, but that they did out of a sort of crazy paranoid mindset, a frustrated mindset that developed over the course of this 2-month conflict.
Anyone else who wants to come in on that?
Yeah, I agree with Tristan's comments here. You can't underestimate the paranoia of Koen and other, you know, VOC commanders. Adam Klulo has written a very good book on the Amboina massacre, which is 2 years later, the execution of Japanese soldiers, a Portuguese slave master, and English merchants in the fortress at Ambon. And there's very close connection there, because the VOC commander in Ambon, Van Spult, was basically the right-hand man of Koen. He knew about what happened in the Banda Islands, you know, 2 years earlier, and all these conspiracy theories about, you know, how supposedly Koen was the target of conspiracies by disaffected rebels, right? And this all carries over. And yes, if you say these guys were crazy, they were paranoid, yes, absolutely. That's what they were. And you know, that is literally what fuels them, right? This is how they take action. And not just, by the way, in the Banda Islands. We've seen examples of that in Bantam, for example, as well, and in Batavia. In Bantam, very early on, you know, there are all these rumors, oh, you know, a certain group of the population is targeting us. You know, we're sitting here in our trading post, but, you know, before we know it, you know, there's a group of people that is going to literally barge in and take over the trading post. And both the Dutch and the English, by the way, they have all these paranoid ideas about how they are being targeted by somebody, right? So there's this constant undertone of fear that you very clearly see in the archival documents. And yes, that erupts on the Banda Islands in the spring of 1621. Absolutely.
Mohammed, do you want to say? Do you want to come in on this as well?
Yeah. There's another question about why Jan Petersen Koen kill Banda people in 1621. From our elders also asked, maybe Jan Petersen Koen want to fight back or revenge,
Yes.
because they kill the Verhoeven already before. So the question is Jan Petersen Koen it's because the crazy is by herself, or because he want to revenge the Verhoeven kill before
I would say that the Verhoeven episode is certainly in the back of their minds. And remember, Verhoeven was not just any commander, he was, you know,
low bet.
Sorry. He was, you know, he was basically the leader at that point. Not exactly a governor general, but, you know, the next person to come, let's say, come out of the Netherlands had the official title, but he, Verhoeven was very much the leader of the VOC in Asia at that point in time in 1609. It came with very important orders from the VOC directors. Let's say the VOC directors had told him, you need to conclude treaties, exclusive treaties with various rulers and peoples, tying them to the VOC. And, as part of that, you also need to, establish fortifications, an explicit order to build fortifications. And in the Banda Islands, obviously, the people with whom Verhoeven was talking, they didn't want any of this. And they managed to basically to trap him and various troops that he had brought with him and murdered him. So this was well known, of course, amongst the VOC commanders, and also it gives the impression, of course, you can't trust the Bandanese, right? That's from the perspective of the Dutch. If you can't literally go on shore and talk to these guys because it's far too dangerous. Look what happened to Verhoeven, all right? So that's certainly in the back of their minds, absolutely, yeah.
Paranoia and lust for revenge, absolutely. But I think for those of us who have access to Dutch sources, the big challenge remains to find method in this madness, right? Because this was a pattern, not just a one-off event. To try and understand sort of what gave birth to this paranoia systematically, and why did paranoia translate in these kind of policies in their full extremity in the Banda Islands, but in different variants in so many other places. We have already now a long conversation going on in the chat, so too much points actually to cover in this conversation, but I want to point out one that was repeated, which is about the role of the events in Bandanese memory, in particular the Chakalele. So I wanted to point out these comments that were made, among others, and I have to scroll back, by Sogi Maskat. Maybe Sogi, if Sogi Maskat wants to give the floor to say something about this, but otherwise to ask people to reflect on this question of memory as well. Sogi.
Yeah. Hi, hey Pepijn, thank you very much for the time given to me. I would just like highlight about what is Chakalele Banda. Everyone from Maluku might know that Chakalele is very famous in Maluku, but the Banda Chakalele one is very different from others because that's the art dance that depict what happened in the past that Bandanese express in the dance and we see that some symbols like they have bamboos with some clothes tied on the bamboo pole. It represents the heads of the Bandanese orang kaya who have executed by the Dutch. So that's the way Bandanese preserve the historical stories by expressing through the dance. And still others depict events in the past through the Chakalele, like philosophy and others' story. And that's the way how Bandanese they preserve the historical events through the dance of Chakalele. And there's still symbol showing during Chakalele, like tempat siri represents how they do prayer. And they, you know that in the past that people do not read, do not write. That's why how to memorize events that occur in the past through the dance and through the tradition. That's a bit highlight about Chakalele, but it would be very interesting if someone want to see the dance itself in Banda, which perform occasionally sometimes. I really thanks to Abba and Farid who really inspire, motivating people in Banda, the young generation, to preserve the history through adat and culture. Thank you also for Joella, who really support Bandanese and the culture there. Thank you, everyone.
So we have only 10 minutes left, so I want to ask the speakers to keep this question in mind, how we think, because this is the first of an interdisciplinary series, and this one focuses, of course, on historical approaches, how you might think we could enrich our historical approaches, and especially use maybe new approaches to sources, etc., to make more visible the Bandanese perspective in our reflections on the Bandung then. So that's the large question that I want to lay out here, that in some ways follows from Sobi Muscat's remark. I have to be selective. I encourage you all to read the chat because it contains so many interesting ideas. We will copy the chat as well after this session to preserve it and to be able to carry on these ideas in next sessions. But there's one, I think, very important topic that has been raised, which is the continuation of Bandanese culture, especially of the expelled Bandanese who fled to Banda Eli and other places. Let me see. I have it written down here. Sabtu Ohoirat is here with us, I believe, currently from Banda Eli, but otherwise he's been doing work on Banda Eli. So I wanted to ask him whether he could say something about this. Is Sabtu still with us? He left several comments.
Stop.
That's good.
Yeah, the question from Sabtu in email, I think that's a very good question. Yeah.
Sabtu
From
is here.
my friend Sabtu. Sabtu is here?
Yes, Sabtu is here.
Yes, he is here. I'm asking him to unmute.
Hello.
But he has to unmute.
Hello, Sabtu.
You have to unmute.
Sure. Yeah, there we go.
That's good. Yeah.
So I have to answer Sabtu question in email, Joella or Pepijn?
Well, certainly it's really appreciated if speakers answer the various questions that they feel they can pick up. We will send them to them individually, and you can answer questions by email. But I also wanted to ask Sabtu to say a few words about your remark, if you want to share some of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'm actually really interested. I was really was interested in studying on Banda. You know, like Sugeng is one of my my research partner in 1995 on expedition, Spice Islands expedition team on Banda Island, studying socio-cultural and ethnic, and also the governmental developments and stuff. And here, since the last December last year, I have been kind of independent researcher on studying on Banda people, because Banda historically is not only influencing, the flee, to K Islands to survive themselves. Not only that, but religiously, Islamic leaders from K Islands at the moment, even from to now, are actually descendants from Banda long before the massacre. So we are kind of culturally very closely related to the Bandanese, especially in Banda Eli and Banda Elat. Banda Eli and Banda Elat are actually only one Banda, because Elat, actually Elat, is from an original word of Bandanese, which is called Elat, means parts of the people. Sebahagian orang Banda, so they stay in Elat. They are separated to two places, but they are only Bandanese. I talked to the Raja of Banda Elat, Banda Eli, whose name is Basar Alimuddin Latar, is the 14th Rajas of Banda, moving since the year 2021 or 1991 or 1992, something. And even if we are Cape people, original indigenous Cape people, and we identify these Bandanese people are Cape people for now, but for these Bandanese descendants, identify themselves as Bandanese rather than Cape people. They call themselves Wandan, means Orang Banda, not Orang Cape. They speak their own language. These Bandanese people speak their own language. They are Bandanese, even if they live in Cape. They are culturally related to the Hukum Adat on Cape Islands, to Ursiwo and Orlimo on Cape Island, Norvulngabal, as part of socially Cape people. But they manage their own culturally. They run their own systems within Bandanese culture rather than of Cape culture. And I think they feel suffering a lot, you know, feeling like when you talk about Banda, when you talk about the Banda massacre, you know, you can feel how their face expression is. You know, you can see their face, how their face tell you they are so sad about 40 kapala, 42 or 45 kapala Orangkai that are slaughtered, and that the heads are put on a pole of bamboo. They remember, you know, storytelling, but they still remember from their ancestors that this is not a made-up story, but it's a real story that they suffered. They seen it. They seen the slaughter, the how you call it, the ethnic cleansing or whatever definition you are, you know, preferring to put on. But the Bandanese people now, you know, before the last flee down to K Island with Belang called Duan, this last trip is the bigger one, consisting of the leaders of Islamic religious leaders, and also the Raja people. They call it Lebetelu, which consists of imams, and also from the Ratat, means the Rajas, with the whole community. There were actually 3 boats before this last one, and spreading to Cape Besar, Cape Kecil, and even to Tanimbar Islands, and some of them are converted to Christian finally. You know, I think there should be a more advanced research or deeper research go down inside to find out what really is going to happen, because we are talking about people are slaughtered on Banda Islands, but you never know what is happening with these people on the other islands, how they are related, they are socially connected as relative of people who are now, some of them are living on Papua, some are in Tanimbar Islands as Christians, some are on Aero Islands. Not only the Banda Neira and Banda Eli and Banda Elat, but some people are far spread out. Some are all over Indonesia. Some are even to Java, to Kur Island, which is called from Nene Boyratan. There is a king. This is a local Raja on Kur Island, whose family name is Nene Boyratan, who is very known to Bandanese, I think. You know, Sugeng know the story, really.
Thank you, Sabtu. I think this is a really important contribution, and we will discuss the matter of sort of ancestry in Kai and the sort of the oral recollections in one of the later roundtables, actually. So I really hope you can join us then as well. We are now close to the finishing time. I can't possibly give everyone the floor. I want to, if you allow us to run 5 minutes over, to give Patricia Speyer the chance to ask a final question, because Bimanu Hutu, my co-organizer, pointed out that I should give you the floor and then go back to the speakers for very, very brief final remarks. So I want you to think already about your 2-3 sentence closing statements. Patricia Speyer.
Thank you very much. I don't feel entirely comfortable being the person with the last remark or question with so many eloquent remarks on the chat. With thank you for organizing this wonderful series. I will be moving my agenda around so I can attend the rest. And thank you for all the presentations. I guess one of the things perhaps a comment, is I was intrigued by the title of this first in the series. That is the historical implications of the Bandanese massacre. And I guess my question is, and there have been numerous answers during this last hour and a half, is the historical implications in relationship to what? So is it in relationship, and I think the answer is multiple. Is it in relationship to Dutch historiography? Is it in relationship to the traces of memory, embodied memory in gesture, in dance, in song? Is it in relationship to less acknowledged, recognized forms of memory work and history making, which are come through in stories, in words, in names of towns, certainly Banda Eli, Eilat, but apparently other parts of the archipelago. There's so many different ways. Is it in, I think one of the last chats, is it in explicit engagement by younger people in Banda today with this kind of history? And not just in Banda, I mean, there have been urban sketcher connections between urban sketchers, groups in Banda, groups in New York, about Pulau Rune and all that. So I think, as you're moving forward, it would be interesting, I think, to perhaps make these different registers explicit in the different ways they have implications for Banda, for people in Banda today, for the, I'm going on too long, but you can see the point, but historical implications in relationship to what, and how recognizing what is, I think could be interesting also for the rest of this series. I will say also that there is someone, a colleague from Finland, Timo Kartanen, who'll be weighing in on one of the next series, who actually spent a long time working in Banda Eli way back when, I think in the late 1980s. But thank you very much. It's been super stimulating and wonderful to catch a bit of glimpse of Banda and Kay in the background also. I miss those places.
Thank you, Patricia. I'll now take the speakers in reverse order, and please keep your comments very final thoughty. Tristan.
Well, I'll just stick to briefly answering the excellent question then. In relation to what? Well, I guess that was in the eye of the beholder. So I mostly focused on in relation to the history of the Eastern Archipelago more generally in the first half of the 17th century, as 1621 often becomes this sort of separate thing, which it's not. That's at least how I interpreted it. And thank you.
Martine?
Yes, I would second Tristan on that. 1621 is not an isolated incident, not at all. in terms of, sources, I think it's very interesting that you're going to explore, memory and song and all kinds of artistic expressions, that may be related to the Banda massacre of 1621. But I would also say that there are still sources in the Dutch National Archives that have not been explored in sufficient depth. And one thing, one source that literally I cannot read are literally copies of the treaties in indigenous languages. I have seen, copies of the treaties in Malaysian languages, right? Usually in Latin letters, right? No Arabic script, it's Latin letters that are used, but I cannot read it. And literally what we need is a bigger project where, people with multiple languages are involved, of course, from different backgrounds and also from different parts of the world, where we really do a deep trawl, I would say, of the VOC archives, because what we have right now, the published editions by Koolhaas, for example, the Corpus Neerlandico Indicum, basically these are the Dutch texts, and that's it. And they're usually not contextualized at all, right? That's the other problem, right? Because you have to see it in context. Already at the time, there were VOC commanders who said, indigenous rulers or indigenous peoples will not be able to stick to these terms. That was already said at the time. They knew this, right? So in that sense, there's also a debate going on within the VOC itself. The VOC is not one thing. There are debates going on between these commanders, with the VOC directors, and of course, involving the Dutch States General at certain points as well. So there are debates going on. Again, empires of paper, right? Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the final remark, Mohammed Farid, who's currently left his chair. I hope Mohammed, you're still with us. Yes, Mohammed. There you are. Can you give us your final remark? Mohammed? Well, we seem to have some trouble here. In the meantime, while Mohammed is trying to fix the echo, I just wanted to remind you that this is part of a series. To please join us for the next session and register online if you haven't done so. And also to echo what Joella said in the beginning, and I will once again post the link here, that as part of this initiative, we realized the difficulty of raising funds for commemorative activities right now. And in conversation, of course, with the organizing committee on the Banda Islands, we launched a GoFundMe campaign where people can give a contribution to help it make possible, actually, that there is an organized commemoration on the Banda Islands on this crucial 400 years. So anyone who can spare anything, any contribution, however large or small, will be equally appreciated. I'm afraid Mohammed Farid has not managed to solve the technical issues, so we'll have to wait for his next appearance in one of the next sessions for his comments. And for now, we want to thank you all for participating in what I think was a wonderful launch of this initiative, and I hope to see you all at the next session. Thank you. Terima kasih banyak.
This is the announcement for the next session in this International Roundtable series. Please visit our website to register. Thank you for watching this video. I want to thank our organizing partners, my fellow members of the working group, and all the speakers and participants for this inspiring meeting.